The first time I camped by the lake, I thought it would be just another weekend escape from the noise of suburban life. I had been living in the same cookie-cutter neighborhood for years, where everything was too perfect, too neat, and everyone knew everyone else's business. It was suffocating. I needed something different. I wanted freedom. So, I packed up my gear, grabbed a tent, and set up right by the water. Away from the houses, away from all the rules. The sun was setting as I unpacked, casting a warm, golden glow over the lake, and I could hear the distant sound of birds chirping. The water rippled gently, and for the first time in ages, I felt a sense of peace. That peace didn't last long. It wasn't long before I heard her, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, quick and determined. Mrs. Karen Wilkins, the HOA president. She was one of those people who had way too much time on her hands and an unhealthy obsession with rules. She knew everything about everyone in the neighborhood, and she had no qualms about enforcing the rules, even the ridiculous ones. "Excuse me," she called, striding toward me with a look of righteous indignation, as though I had personally offended her. "What do you think you're doing?" I stood up from my camp chair and dusted off my hands, trying to remain calm. "I'm camping," I said flatly, "on the lake, just like I have every right to do." She crossed her arms over her chest, the picture of authority. "There are rules," she said, her tone condescending, as though I were a child who had just broken a rule without understanding the consequences. "You can't just set up a campsite anywhere you want. You need permission from the HOA." I couldn't help it. I laughed, not bothering to hide the frustration in my voice. "Permission? For camping by a public lake? Seriously?" Her eyes narrowed. "You're disrupting the peace," she continued, her voice growing louder. "This is private property, and I will not tolerate this kind of behavior." I shook my head, trying to keep my composure. It was one thing to be micromanaged over petty stuff like lawn height or mailbox colors, but this? It was ridiculous. "Fine," I said, my voice sharp now. "Call the cops. I'm not going anywhere." And that's exactly what she did. She whipped out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen as she dialed 911. "I'm calling the police," she said, her voice dripping with venom, as if I had committed some grave crime. "You're breaking the rules. This is a violation of HOA regulations." I couldn't believe it. I had just set up a campfire by a lake, and Karen had called the cops. Within 20 minutes, 2 officers arrived. They stepped out of their car, looking as if they had better things to do. One of them had that tired, exasperated look I'd seen before, the kind that said, "I don't want to be here, but here I am." Karen immediately rushed over to them, pointing at me like I was some kind of criminal. "Officer, this person is camping illegally," she said, her voice dripping with self-righteousness. "They're violating HOA rules and disturbing the peace. I demand you remove them immediately." The officer turned to me, his expression flat. "Ma'am, do you have any idea why we're here?" "Yeah," I replied, barely able to keep my voice from shaking with irritation. "I'm camping." He glanced at Karen, then back at me, clearly exhausted by the whole situation. "Ma'am," he said, "unless there's a violation of the law, there's nothing we can do. You're free to continue your camping." Karen's face twisted with frustration. "But the rules." "Ma'am," the officer interjected, holding up a hand to silence her. "We've heard enough. Unless this is a legal issue, there's nothing we can do." He turned to me. "Just keep things peaceful, all right?" I could see Karen seething as she stomped off toward her house, muttering about unlawful campers under her breath. The officers gave me a brief nod before heading back to their car, clearly relieved to be leaving. But as they drove off, I knew it wasn't over. Karen wasn't one to let things go, especially when she thought she had been slighted. The next day, as I was packing up my gear, I got a call from Dave, one of my neighbors. He was one of the few people who didn't bow down to Karen's HOA dictatorship. "Hey, just so you know," Dave said, his voice tinged with concern, "I heard Karen's already talking about making a formal complaint. She's going to try to get you banned from camping by the lake. She's got most of the board on her side." I cursed under my breath. Of course, she would escalate it. But I wasn't about to back down. If Karen thought she could control the whole neighborhood, she had another thing coming. I was going to make sure she regretted ever messing with me. I cursed under my breath. Of course, Karen wouldn't let this go. She was like a bulldog with a bone once she had a cause to rally behind. The next few days were filled with whispers and side glances whenever I went to the local grocery store or bumped into neighbors. I could feel Karen's influence growing like a shadow over the entire neighborhood. It wasn't just about me anymore. She was turning the whole HOA against me, and it wasn't long before I got the first official letter in the mail. The letter was from the HOA, citing me for violating community rules, specifically the one about camping on community property without prior approval. They demanded that I attend a meeting to discuss my infraction, or else face fines and possible legal action. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. Karen had gone all in, using the full power of the HOA to turn my weekend getaway into a battle of wills. But I wasn't about to let her win. I called Dave as soon as I read the letter. "I need your help," I said, pacing around my living room, the letter still crumpled in my hand. "I need to put an end to this whole HOA nonsense. I can't let her control this neighborhood anymore." Dave didn't hesitate. "I'm with you," he said. "We'll get to the bottom of this." We started gathering evidence, speaking to other neighbors who were frustrated with the HOA's constant overreach. It wasn't just about me and my lakeside camping anymore. Over the years, the HOA had imposed ridiculous rules on everyone, from requiring certain paint colors for fences to telling people they couldn't have a vegetable garden in their own backyard. People were fed up, but they were too afraid to speak up. Fear of retaliation, fear of fines, fear of Karen's wrath. But I wasn't afraid anymore. At the HOA meeting, the air was thick with tension. Karen sat at the head of the table, her smug expression barely hiding her sense of victory. The rest of the board members sat in silence, some looking uncomfortable, others watching me with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. I stood at the front of the room, the evidence I had gathered spread out before me. Dave stood by my side, a silent ally. I began my defense calmly, methodically. I explained the situation from my perspective, showing the board that I hadn't done anything illegal, nothing that warranted such an over-the-top response. And then, as I reached the part where Karen had involved the police, I paused for effect. "I'm not here to argue about whether I was camping," I said, my voice steady. "I'm here to ask why we allow one person to control this entire neighborhood. Why are we letting Karen use the HOA as her personal weapon?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Karen's face went pale, and she opened her mouth to say something, but I wasn't finished. For years, the HOA has been used to enforce petty rules that don't protect the community, but rather divide it. I'm not the only one who's felt the sting of this. I've spoken to many of you. You're all tired of it. The overregulation, the constant fear of breaking some obscure rule. I took a deep breath. We need to make a change. We need to stop letting Karen dictate what happens in this neighborhood. There was a long pause. Karen shot me a look of pure hatred, but I could see the cracks forming. The other members of the board were exchanging glances. It was clear they hadn't expected this kind of pushback. Finally, one of the board members, a middle-aged man I didn't recognize, spoke up. "She's right," he said, his voice firm but measured. "The HOA has gone too far in recent years. The rules have become about control, not about fostering a healthy community." That was all it took. The room erupted into conversation. For the first time in years, people were speaking up, people who had been too afraid to voice their opinions before. The board members who had been silent started to nod, agreeing with the idea of a change. Karen tried to interrupt, but she was drowned out by the growing support from my side. By the end of the meeting, Karen was seething, but there was nothing she could do. The vote was unanimous. The HOA would be restructured, with new leadership and a focus on community well-being, not micromanaging people's lives. Karen, of course, was removed from her position as president. As I walked out of the meeting, I felt a wave of relief. It wasn't just about camping anymore. It was about taking control of our lives, about not letting one person's need for power ruin our sense of community. The neighborhood felt different as I stepped outside. The oppressive atmosphere that had hung over it for so long was beginning to lift. I knew it wasn't over, but it was a start. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. As for Karen, well, she didn't go quietly. She fought back, of course, trying to rally her loyal followers. But it was too late. The tide had turned. People had seen the damage she'd done, and they weren't going to let her do it anymore. In the end, the HOA was dissolved. The new neighborhood board focused on collaboration, not control. And while Karen's influence waned, I knew there would always be those who would try to seize power. But now, the community had learned how to fight back, and I'd shown them how. As for me, I made sure to spend many more weekends by the lake, camping peacefully, without anyone to tell me I couldn't. The rules had changed, and so had I. The community was free, and I was finally free to enjoy the quiet, the water, and my own space.